Number 1.
When I was a freshman, my friends and I would go to a nice bar in the city centre, a pretty safe place. One winter night, around 2 AM, after a few drinks, I felt quite sleepy and decided to go home, but told no one about it since I knew others would persuade me to stay for more drinks. Normally, I would never go home alone, so I went out and called a taxi. The operator told me a red VW Passat would pick me up in about 10 minutes. I stood outside, waiting. It was snowing heavily and I was really cold. The taxi was not coming. After about 10 minutes, a big blue taxi car, I have no idea what the brand was, stopped next to me and the driver rolled down his window. He asked me where I was going. I should have realized this was strange because the taxi I called should have known where my address is. Being tipsy and all, I told him my address and he told me to get in the car. I got in the back and we took off. I quickly realized there was someone sitting next to the driver in the passenger seat. It was a man in his 40s, just like the driver. They were talking about where they should go and mentioned the streets nowhere near my home. The driver's friend said they should go to that street since he has a young female friend there, and we all could have fun. I thought I'm in a big mess. Then, the driver's friend turned to me and asked me if I wanted some vodka. I declined and turned my head to the window. Upon closer inspection of me, the friend said,
You're so young.
He sounded pleased. I was 19 at the time, but seemed around 15 to 16. I started asking them to stop the car and let me out. I could walk home on foot. They assured me I would get home eventually. I shrugged and started sobbing quietly while they were making plans where they should go. My only thoughts were that I'm going to die and my friends and family have no idea where I am. I asked them several more times to let me go, but they just kept making their plans. I sobered up a bit and realized I couldn't fight them off if I had to, since I was only 5'4" and 110 pounds. The only thing I could do was run, and I did. I waited till the car stopped at red light, opened the door and ran as fast as I could do to some suburban area. As I left the car behind me, I heard them shouting,
"Hey bitch, pay for your ride."
It took me an hour to walk back home on foot.
Number 2.
I am a 20-year-old male and I flew to India last November to meet a few family members. It was my first time flying on my own to India, and despite what my family would tell me, I wasn't at all worried since I can speak and understand Hindi, albeit quite badly. I looked like I could pass for an Indian, which I thought would help me blend in. I landed at around 2 AM and after landing at Mumbai International Airport, I had to catch a quick airport coach to take me from the international to the domestic airport. Standard procedure, although I found it a bit strange for such a busy airport to have such a system. I managed to make my way onto the coach. Now, I know you must be thinking that the coach must be fake, but it wasn't the coach. I managed to get to the domestic airport just fine, and as I was waiting to disembark, I saw some people dressed in airport gear checking people's boarding passes. So, I held my pass to show the guy, and as he looked at it, he gave me a perplexed look. He scanned my pass again and stated that my flight wasn't due to depart in 4 hours. This is true, but I thought I'd chill at the airport anyway. He said that I'd have to take a taxi and go back to the international airport, as they would not let me get into the domestic unless the departure was less than 2 hours. I obviously wasn't going to pay for a taxi back to the airport and didn't understand why the airport wouldn't let me in. However, after thinking about all the weird procedures Indian airports have had so far, I thought this may be another one of its irritating quirks. I agreed with the guy and walked with him to the car park. He was asking me where I was from and what I was doing in India. Just some friendly banter, I thought. But I was too tired and shy to even attempt to speak to him in Hindi. I kept telling him that I'm not paying for the taxi and that I have no money on me just to make sure he wasn't going to scam me. He kept nodding and took me to the taxi he said I should take. Now, from watching Bollywood films, I know how Mumbai taxis look. They're yellow and black and are a distinctive model. This taxi was a normal silver-coloured car with not even an ounce of credibility to pass as a taxi in Mumbai. Surrounding the taxi were a bunch of eerie-looking guys, all looking at me with a straight face. Feeling a bit awry, I backed away while they were talking to one another. Thankfully, the guy who led me to them didn't know I could speak Hindi, and they were saying stuff like,
He's some sweet goods. We'll have fun with him. You've bought a good one. I'll be sure not to let him go.
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I started sweating and shaking. I know people back home have said I act a bit camp and apparently unintentionally act flirtatious, but I had no idea that a bunch of Indian guys would have any interest in me, apart from maybe getting some money. Visibly shaken, I was completely speechless and had no idea how to get out of the situation. The guy had my boarding pass and the car door was open. Then I had an idea. I said to the guy in English, "Can I just quickly buy a coffee? I've been parked for so long." He stated that the police at the door of the airport wouldn't let me in no matter how much I tried, and the best thing to do was get into the car. I insisted that I'd try and get in as I was really thirsty and my voice started croaking, out of fear originally, but thankfully it could be passed as thirst. His friends told him to give my boarding pass back and let me try it out. He gave it back and made me promise I'd come back after the coffee. I obviously obliged and gave him a cute smile as I snatched the pass and power walked into the terminal. Of course, I didn't want to act too alarmed as they could have easily ran up to me and tackled me. In addition, the police could have been in cohorts with them and refused me access. So, I made my way to the terminal and showed the policeman my boarding pass. He had a look, and I asked him if I was allowed to enter the terminal just to make sure. He said, "Of course, your flight departs from here," and then directed me to the departures lounge. I'd never felt so thankful in my life. I breathed a sigh of relief as I hightailed it up the escalator and passed the security check to make sure the gang wouldn't be let in. It was about 4 AM at this point, and all I could think of was, what would have happened if I couldn't understand Hindi and went into that taxi? To this day, I shudder at the thought. My only regret is not informing the police when I was let in. I think nerves did get the better of me, and I felt distrust towards everyone. Plus, Indian police officers wouldn't have done much to help the situation anyway. They probably would have told me to keep calm and carry on.
Number 3.
Last summer, I spent a good 2 months studying abroad in Italy, and the last few weeks travelling around. First time out of the States, 21-year-old female, and going into my senior year of university. I spent my last weekend in Barcelona, Spain. Since I was only there for a short amount of time, I had elected not to pay for a phone or a phone card or anything like that. It wasn't a problem until now. I had gone out, like all young travellers, to a nightclub called Opium. If you're unfamiliar with Spanish nighttime hours, you start at 2 AM and go till maybe 5 to 7 AM. I left this nightclub at 6 AM. I had travelled alone and stayed in an all-girls dorm in a very nice hostel. I went with a big group of various European nationals and ended up alone at the end, so I left in an officially marked taxi cab at the taxi stand outside the club at 6. I got in, and the driver is a scrawny looking man, definitely not of Spanish descent. He speaks English, so I give him the name of my hostel and just stare out of the window. And what do you know? 10 minutes later, I watch my hostel zoom by. I point this out to the driver and he just grins at me.
I don't know.
You do know, you were just speaking English.
No English, Sunrise.
What?
Watch Sunrise.
At this point, I was dumbfounded. I should have been on my game and jumped out of the cab or something, but I was a tired, alone, drunk and phoneless suburban American girl. The fact that I could be a statistic took a few moments to dawn at me. Instead, I just stupidly ask him where he thinks he's going and try and gesture behind us towards the hostel. After about 10 minutes of me becoming more and more agitated, he grabs my wrist and drags my hand to his crotch. I could feel his hard member through his pants. That was it. I yanked my hand away and started crying, begging him to stop, to let me out and to turn around. The doors were locked and he was still speeding up at this point, too fast for me to jump out without seriously harming myself. He simply grabbed my hand again and tried to pull it towards his crotch, but when I yanked it away, still crying, he reached over and grabbed my breast and tried to move his hand down to my crotch. At this point, we were about 20 minutes away from my hostel and about to exit the city. I panicked when I saw the buildings thinning and started shrieking my head off, yelling things like, "Turn this car the fuck around, I'll fucking call the cops on you. What the fuck is this? Bring me back right now." I really can't tell you what made him do it. I don't know if it was my batshit crazy screams, my tears, me shoving him in his seat. I don't know. All I said to him at that point was that he was a disgusting coward, and something about me saying this finally made him turn the cab around. Still hysterical, still dumb for not bolting the fuck out of that car, he pulls up outside my hostel and looks at me and says,
€30.
as if nothing happened. I wish I could tell you I told him to go fuck himself, but again, I was so off my rocker at that point, I shakingly reached into my bag and threw the crumpled bills at him and got the fuck back into my hostel. Some French girls I bonded with asked me what the hell I was doing, and I told them what happened. Apparently, something similar happened to another girl a few weeks ago. She was assaulted. I wish I had gone to the police, but my memories were so fuzzy of exactly what cab company it was and what he looked like, and I was flying back to the States a few days later, so I decided not to go out anymore and stayed within large groups.
Number 4.
This happened to my dad several years ago. He was a taxi driver running day and night shifts. My dad preferred night shifts as the fare was higher. One night, while he was surrounding a housing area, there was a lady waving to my dad's taxi. My dad stopped and picked her up, then asked her where she wanted to go. She replied with the place's name and he started his journey. He was trying to have a conversation with her so it doesn't get boring, and he was looking at her through the rearview mirror. It was then that he realized the lady's head was bowing down. So, my dad thought she was taking a nap or something since it was like 2 a.m. When he nearly reached the place, the lady suddenly asked my dad to stop the car and drop her at the roadside where there were no houses. She paid and went. My dad then tried to look at the side mirror to see where she's heading to, but she was nowhere to be seen. Some 10 minutes into his drive back, he saw a bag at the back left by the lady. He turned around and drove all the way back to look for the lady so he could return the bag to her. After a few kilometers, he saw the lady squatting down at the roadside. He then drives close to her and said,
"Miss, you left your bag in my taxi."
The lady turned her head to my dad, and he was shocked to find that she was eating a dog with her bare hands and mouth. My dad then sped away and never looked back. He tells us this story every so often, and for several years now he's never done the night shifts.
Number 5.
I'm studying abroad, as well as my flatmates here, so we're fairly unfamiliar with the city we're in. This happened a couple of weeks ago on Halloween night. We'd gone out to some parties that night, and had been drinking pretty consistently throughout. At about 4 a.m, we finally decided to make our way back home. We're 3 20-year-old females in short dresses, and while my 2 flatmates were still fairly drunk, I'd sobered up enough. Halloween is always a pretty sociable night, and we'd ended up meeting up and joining various parties throughout, So at this point we found ourselves about a 50-minute walk away from our flat, in an area we barely knew. Fittingly, it was very quiet out and foggy as well. I remember commenting to my friend how it felt like that shot in The Exorcist. We walked through the empty back streets for a few minutes, eventually reaching a main road. Being the most sober of the lot, I was basically herding the others despite being equally as exhausted, thus not at the top of my game. After a few minutes of barely any cars passing, and what taxis we did see there occupied, my friend finally flagged one. UK taxis tend to be black cabs, so they're easy to distinguish. This was some random car, but it had the signature luminescent bar at the top with taxi written on it, so I brushed it off. The driver put down the window and gruffly asked us where we were going. We replied with our addresses. He then asked us how much we were willing to pay, equally as gruffly. Even to my drunk friends, this was weird. But being one of those exceedingly friendly Americans, one kept talking to him. We were all tired after all, and wanted to go home. I was still uneasy though, as we're staying in a really friendly place, and any other taxi driver we've had has been really friendly, and always ready to wax poetic to foreigners about the city. She was just about to get in when I happened to look up at the glowing taxi sign, and I noticed how distorted it was. Looking closer, I realized he'd just spelled taxi in black tape across it. From far, it looked legit. Plus, if you're driving around at night time on weekends, you don't expect your clientele to pay too much attention to this sort of thing. I quickly grabbed her arm and pulled her away, telling her to look at this sign. At first, my friends didn't notice, but when they did, they freaked out. Realizing this, he drove off real quick. An actual black cab passed not long after this, so we got home safely, but we were pretty shaken up. Due to the money question, he was probably just a dude trying to extort more cash out of drunk people with a fake taxi, which is still illegal, but it could have been more sinister. We're young women after all, and you learn to be wary of almost any guy if you're alone at night. I'm just so relieved I happened to look closer, though I have no idea why I did.
Number 6.
This happened when I was 15. Every year, my secondary school would hold a sports day, but because our school didn't have a proper track, we'd always have to go to another school to use their facilities. They held the trials at that other school, and I went down with some friends, but because it was raining so badly, the trials were cancelled. This was in a totally strange part of the city, and I didn't know how to get back home, and none of the buses went in the direction of my home, so I flagged the cab. Once I stepped into the cab and closed the door, the taxi driver, a 40 to 50-year-old man, began driving, then turned and asked,
"Do you have a boyfriend?"
I was thinking, whoa, what the hell, but told him no. On the drive, he started telling me about the school I'd been standing outside, and how 2 students from that school had been touching and stroking each other, fingering each other, and apparently trying to have sex in his car. He went into so much detail about the kids' genitals that it was pretty clear he was playing out some sick, twisted fantasy of his. Basically, he sounded pretty damn horny just talking about it. I was terrified and disturbed by then, and chose not to reply, just staring out of the window. Then, at the red light, he asked me to give him my hand. I was in the back seat, but I was really scared he'd do something to me if I didn't, so I did, and he began stroking and rubbing my hand. After that, he continued with his sex stories about all these students in his car and their genitals. He asked me for my hand a few more times, and I was so freaked out I let him touch them. Then he asked me about my sex life, whether I touched myself, whether I liked people touching me, etc. All the while speaking in this low, lustful, horny kind of voice and grinning creepily. Anyway, when we were nearing my home, he asked for my name and number. I gave him a fake name and said I didn't own a cell phone yet. His response? He smirked creepily at me and said,
"You're just scared of me, aren't you?"
That was the worst part. He knew he was scaring me. He knew I was scared. When we reached my street, I made him drop me off right at the other end of the road, so he wouldn't know exactly which house I lived in. And as I was paying him, he made me give him my hand again, after which he started rubbing and squeezing my hand and wrists for what felt like forever. When I got out, I waited until the car was out of sight before walking back to my house, shaken up. Perhaps I was kind of naive for giving him my hand, but I didn't want to anger him lest he drove me into some foreign part of the city and did unspeakable things to me or something. When my father found out about what happened, he told his friend about it, who happens to be the manager of that very cab company, and she fired him immediately. Turns out, he admitted to the harassment.
Hey guys, it's the Grim Reader here. I hope you enjoyed listening through that. If you did, please slap a like, and if you haven't already, why not subscribe to be notified of future uploads? If you have a story you want me to narrate, please send it to my email in the description box. Once again, thanks a lot for listening.
Number 1.
When I was a freshman, my friends and I would go to a nice bar in the city centre. Being tipsy and all, I told him my address and he told me to get in the car. I got in the back and we took off. I quickly realised there was someone sitting next to the driver in the passenger seat. It was a man in his 40s, just like the driver. They were talking about where they should go and mentioned the streets nowhere near my home. The driver's friend said they should go to that street since he has a young female stood outside waiting. It was snowing heavily and I was really cold. The taxi was not coming. After about 10 minutes, a big blue taxi car, I have no idea what the brand was, stops next to me and the driver rolled down his window. He asked me where I was going. I should have realised this was strange because the taxi I called should have known where my address is. A friend there, and
We all could have fun.
I thought I'm in a big mess. Then, the driver's friend turned to me and asked me if I wanted some vodka. I declined and turned my head to the window. Upon closer inspection of me, the friend said,
You're so young.
He sounded pleased. I was a pretty safe place. One winter night, around 2 AM, after a few drinks, I felt quite sleepy and decided to go home, but told no one about it since I knew others would persuade me to stay for more drinks. Normally, I would never go home alone, so I went out and called a taxi. The operator told me a red VW Passat would pick me up in about 10 minutes. I